Hey everybody, it's John Carnell, and I'm here today to present another DevDrop. And this DevDrop's pretty exciting. It's actually a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is around configuration management, DevOps, pretty much all things dealing with infrastructure and administration. The topic today is we're going to cover a new tool that Genesys Cloud is about to release called CX Code. And what CX Code basically is, it's a tool that allows you to declaratively define and manage common Genesys Cloud configuration objects like queues, skills, groups, users, and do that declaratively via text files. The obvious implications of this is that you want to be able to build this into a CI/CD pipeline that will let you manage your configuration changes for objects within your Genesys Cloud environment and be able to move them forward and promote them as they go through your dev, your test, and your production environment. So why is this so important? Well, many of you guys, if you have been doing software development or system administration for any period of time, can kind of relate to this. Years ago, I worked as a manager of a call center team, and my team was working on a big implementation of a project. We had several integrations that were rolling out, most of them tied deeply to certain queues being created and in place within our call center environment. We've been working like the devil to get it out. And we went out and we pushed our code to production on Sunday night. We did some basic checkout, and then Monday morning we left, and we got a call as soon as we got in and the call center opened that, hey, one of the integrations isn't working correctly. And it was kind of a bit of a black eye for the team because we were all excited, we were ready to go. And when we dug into it, what it came down to is when we did our deployment that night, this was before we did, had CI/CD pipelines and you only had web UIs or even desktop UIs, is we basically had forgotten to configure one of our queues. We had them all configured in tests, everything had run, but we forgot one thing, one human error that went out there. And so what CX Code does is it really is focused on three core principles. Is one, you want to make sure that the configuration in your Genesys Cloud environment is immutable, which means that you shouldn't have people going in via the UI and making modifications to core objects, but instead doing them declaratively and right at the beginning and promoting them from dev and to test and to production without any human being touching it. It should be the same configuration. It should be going through a CI/CD pipeline. It should be getting promoted rather than sitting there and having to be coded by hand or through the UI. The second thing is we want our configuration to be declaratively managed. And what that means is you want to be able to describe your configuration without knowing how it's going to be implemented. Before kind of the modern practices of DevOps and CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment, one of the problems that you ran into is, yeah, you could do all this stuff via scripts and you could script all this deployment, but then you had to know the APIs, you had to know the nuances, and you had to understand the order in which things were created because there could be dependencies between that. But when you're using a configuration management tool or a tool like CX Code, what you really want to be able to do is declare this stuff, have your configuration declared, and not worry about like, okay, what order things are going to run in, how are they going to resolve dependencies between objects. And the third and the last thing is you want to make your configuration easy and readable to the human eye and in a format that can be checked into a source control system. If you do all your configuration via UI, it requires somebody to go in and look at it. They have to be able to see it, and they just can't scan it. And if they make a change, it might be audited, it might not. If people were sharing credentials, which is obviously not a good practice, you really have no idea how that change got introduced in here. But by taking your configuration, putting it in plain text files, and then checking it into source control right like a piece of code, you're basically setting yourself up to be able to promote and manage that configuration and see exactly when it changed and where that particular build is in your environment. Okay, great. So that's CX Code and what it can do for you. But let's start with what is CX Code built on. It's interesting. We took a step back. In the past, we've always liked to embrace the fact that we don't try to completely reinvent the wheel. we at Genesys Cloud had learned a lot of painful lessons, even from doing some of our own DevOps work, about how complicated DevOps can be. So what we decided to do with CX's code is really build on some tried and true platforms. And the CX's code team chose to build the CX's code product on top of Terraform. Terraform is an open source project. It is sponsored by the HashiCorp group, and it's really a cloud provisioning tool that lets you provision different cloud providers using a common language and format, and then providing a lot of value added services in there. Now, the way Terraform works is each cloud provider like AWS or Genesys or Google or whoever basically writes a plugin called a provider that is used to expose one or more resources that could be managed in your Terraform configuration files. So once you get those files set up, you can then run Terraform, and it will pull down the provider that you've defined in it and pull down all the binaries, and then it will go through and resolve, okay, what do I need to create in the environment? What do I need to update, or what do I need to delete? Now, this is a bit of an oversimplification of Terraform's capabilities, but remember, this developer drop is really just a preview of what's coming, and give you a chance to play around with it and understand some of its capabilities. At the end of the video, I'm going to walk through a couple of resources that will talk about Terraform, talk about where you can find this additional information, and then kind of give you some of the next steps. We're planning on releasing this in beta very, very soon, even though the source code and the plugin is already out there. So let's do a quick demo. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through showing how to set up a Terraform file with the plugins to say, here's the version of Terraform I want, here's the Genesys Cloud provider I want. And then we're going to use a tool to configure a user, configure a queue, and then map users to a queue. All right, so let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and we're just going to go ahead and look at some code. All right, I'm just going out here. Give me a moment. All right, so I have got a file out here. Now, the cool thing about Terraform is I can put everything I want in one configuration file, or I can break out into multiple configuration files. When I run my Terraform commands, it's going to take any file that ends with a .tf in that directory and aggregate them all together into one big file and process them. So it makes it really nice so that I can organize things. Now, what I like to do as I've been playing around with this tool is I like to put a kind of our core configuration in a file named after the environment. So in here, I define my Terraform version that I want to use, and I define the required plugins. Then, so in this case, we're looking at using the Genesys Cloud plugin. Then what I'm going to do is I am going to provide configuration information and basically activate the plugin by using provider Genesys Cloud. Now, if you read the documentation, you could install the auth credential ID and the secrets and define the region inside of this block of code. But I've chosen instead to set this as environment variables that the provider already reads from. That way I don't have to expose any of that information. I can check it into source control. I can pull it down in a CI/CD pipeline and only apply the configuration I want. If you want to see what goes in here, at the end, I'll show you where all of the Genesys Cloud registry stuff is located in Terraform, and go from there. Now, I also exposed one little resource. This is a resource that was written by our CX's code team, which will basically let you export any Genesys Cloud information that you would like. I'm going to walk into this in a little bit, but it's a way of basically just saying, hey, give me everything that's in my environment, dump it to a file as JSON, dump it to a file as a Terraform file. So it's a way for you to export and basically start with an environment that's already out there and then start putting it all under version control. So let's go out here first. I want to go through, and I'm going to walk through in a little bit more detail this. I'm defining user objects out here. So what I have here is I've got user objects that are defined. And if you've used our API or our CLI, a lot of the data is exactly the same. As a matter of fact, underneath the covers, it's basically the provider is calling our public API. So you're basically using the same behavior that you would use in our API or in the CLI. Now, a couple things to notice is, one, every resource that we define is going to have to give the resource type. In this case, The resource type is Genesys Cloud User. We have, I believe, like 10 or 12 resource types, and we're going to be continuing to build out those resource types as we go. The next thing you'll notice is this name or label out here. And this, you can see this in other user definitions too. This is a logical name for this resource. So I call this test user. And the reason this is here is at some point, we're going to demonstrate how to map relationships between objects and show that there's a dependency. Remember, Terraform will go out and it will basically create a tree of all of your resources, and it will try to create an object, and if there's a dependency on it, it will walk that dependency tree, see if that dependent object is already created, and if it isn't, it will try to create that object or update that object or whatever. Now, you use this label here, this logical name, to basically go out and establish that as a linkage that you can use in later files. So let's go out here. I'm going to go out and create a couple of user accounts, and let me just go out to Terraform and run it. Let me see. I had some errors from some previous attempts, so let me go ahead and clear this. Now, what I'm going to do is I am going to run Terraform Init. I'm going to pretend like this is the first time I'm running it, or I'm pulling this down out of my source control system. And you run Terraform Init because that basically initializes the environment. Now, you don't have to worry if it's already out there on a directory. It's ID impotent, but it's basically going to check your Terraform files, your .tf files, and see if all the providers are there and everything is set up and ready to go in terms of some state files that it manages. And I'll show you those in just a bit. So I'm going to run Terraform Init. It says everything's ready to go. Now, what I can do is run Terraform plan, which will tell me if anything has changed, right? But it doesn't actually apply them. So in this case, I'm going to run Terraform plan, and it goes up. All right, the plan is 0 to add, 0 to change, and I removed the user from here named Bob Smith. It was from an earlier attempt. So I'm just going to go ahead and I am going to go Terraform Apply. Now what's going to happen is Terraform Apply is basically going to check its state file. There's a file out there called tf state that maintains all the state of what your environment should look like versus what it currently looks like. And if anything changes, it's going to go out and apply those changes. Now in this case, I'm getting rid of this user. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an alert here. When you delete a user as it stands right now with our Terraform provider, it actually sets it in as inactive. Remember, in our underlying API, the user is set as inactive, and then it is soft deleted. The Terraform stuff will actually set that user to inactive, but currently, if you try to create the user, it doesn't check to see if that's user already out there in an inactive state. The dev team's working on it, but I just want to make people aware of it because they run into it in our API, they run into it in our CLI, and they're going to run into it here. So a little bit of fair warning. So it goes out and says, okay, this user is getting ready to be destroyed. Let's go hit yes. And now what's going to happen is Terraform is actually going to connect via the provider, and it's going to carry out its work. Now this ID returned is the Genesys Cloud GUID of whatever was updated or manipulated. So this user is no longer active in the Genesys Cloud platform. So let's go ahead and let's add a user now. I'm going to go out, I'm going to grab John Smith. I'm going to create a new user down here. And let's just fill out and change some of the information. Let's use Robert Smith as my logical name. All right, give me just a moment. And then I'm going to go out and say, I'm Batman. Who doesn't want to be Batman? I mean, come on. Batman's probably one of the coolest heroes out there. So I'm going to create Batman, and I'm going to make him an executive director. And let's say I am Robert Smith. Let's just give it a random email or here, and let's give it a phone number of 555-265-1555. All right. Change it here. And now let's go back into CX's code, or our CX's code plugin. So again, I'm going to run Terraform, and I'm going to go Terraform Apply. And it's going to go out. It's going to provide me with the plan, and I have to type yes if I want to approve this. Now, Terraform does provide an option to auto approve. So this is part of a CI/CD pipeline. You obviously don't want to be entering yes every time you run something. So instead, you can pass in a command line parameter to say auto apply, and it'll just apply it. So I'm going to go ahead and create yes. All right. So let's go see if this user is created. Now, in my environment, I have the Genesys Cloud client. So I'm going to grab the ID that was out there, and I'm going to go GC users get, and look at that. The user was created. Now, we have lots of different resource objects out here, but let's say we've got queues, and we go out here and we've got different queues created. We have I'm modeling out a financial services company. So maybe we have a call center with an IRA queue, a 401k queue, and a retirement queue. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to go out and I am going to add this individual as a member to the queue, right? And so I'm going to go out here and I'm going to look at their logical name that I defined up here, which will be Robert_Smith. And I'm now going to come out here and I'm going to put that in there. And now what I'm going to do is go Terraform Apply. There's my plan. It's showing that I'm adding this new user. Basically, it says will be updated in place, but we're going to add a new user. I'm going to say yes. And away we go. We can see that one modification has been made to this queue. All right. So then we can go GCQs users get, and there is Robert Smith assigned to this particular queue. All right, so very, very cool. This is a very basic example. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to walk you through and just kind of start getting primed in your mind. We're going to be building more content, more devcasts, and maybe a repository, a quick hits type repository out there with examples of different configuration files out there. But I'm hoping you can see the potential use cases. Now, what we haven't done is shown how to put this in a CI/CD pipeline and use it to promote between different environments. But what we have done is shown how we can create our configuration, put it under management in a plain text file, and run it. And this brings a whole new level of consistency to what hasn't been there in the past. One last thing I want to walk through is this in the Hollywood command, this export command. And this is run every time CS code is run. And we're basically just exporting the users. So basically, I just wanted to go out here and I want to go to these guys, and I want to go to Genesys Cloud because it created a cloud. And basically, it just went out there and dumped 3 object files in there. One is a Genesys Cloud.tf.json, which was basically just a JSON representation of all the Terraform data associated with users or whatever we put in there. A TF state file so that you can use to actually preload an environment. So let's say you're coming into an environment that's already out there. I want to export everything. And then once I have it exported, I want to run my Terraform apply and let it rip and be able to manage my state. But I wanted to give it to you. That's one of the providers out there. It's one of the more interesting ones. So let's just go ahead. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. And I'm just going to give you some of my closing thoughts. You know, probably one of the most common questions that I get from people is, you know, where does this all fit together? If I look at it, there's really, with our other development tools, there's really 3 pillars of tools out there. You're going to have your programmatic tools. Those are where you're building your custom integrations. You need to use our API or our SDK to build them out. Heavy business logic, lots of configuration or data transformation. And then you're going to have your administrative and ad hoc tasks. those are going to be things like queue management, getting reports on things. That's where the CLI fits in. The last part is really about managing your infrastructure and where it's going to be, how it's going to be managed. And that's where CX's code fits in. You want something that's immutable, declarative, and is human readable that can be checked into a source control system. So before we close everything out, I want to walk through 3 resources that we have out there or a couple of resources that we have out there that you can take a look at to get started. Let me just share. Okay, first of all, you can go out into Terraform and you can look at their registry and you can just search for Genesys. And when you go out to Genesys, you will see information about our plugin, and then you can see the documentation. The documentation is very well done. I got to give a lot of credit to the development team. They did a great job on putting together really, really nicely written documentation. So over here are our guides, which basically is just how to export your data from an existing Genesys Cloud platform. Your resources, these are all the items that we can currently export out of Genesys Cloud, or excuse me, not export, but manipulate. So this list is going to continue to grow, but you've got divisions, groups, roles, different identity providers, locations, queues, skills, and we're talking about building more and more out there. And if you click on each one, you'll get the endpoints that are being called, which means that your OAuth client has to have the permissions associated with those endpoints, an example of how it's used, and then the schema. Now, if you're interested in how the code works, or if you're interested in contributing a provider, we also have on our GitHub My Pure Cloud account, we have our Terraform provider, Genesys Cloud. And this is basically the source code for everything. It's open source, everything's out there. Finally, I want to leave you with 2 last pieces of resources. One of my personal favorite books, that is just a good overall book on Terraform is Terraform in Action. It's not quite out in print yet. It's from Manning. I've got a copy of this book in its early edition. It's been fantastic. It's geared towards AWS and Azure and using it to configure cloud environments, but it does give you the basics of Terraform and what you can do with it, and then use our provider. The second thing is I found a really nice course from the Free Code Camp on Terraform course, Automate Your AWS Cloud Infrastructure. It's about 2 hours long, again, because Terraform originated in the cloud provisioning world around infrastructure. It's geared towards AWS, but it does give a very nice overview of how to use Terraform. So that's it, guys. That's everything I have. Like I said, we'll have more resources coming out. I'm really excited about it, and I'm hoping you can download Terraform, play with it, play with our plugin, and give us feedback. We're just as excited to have this out there as I'm sure many of you are to have it. So thanks again, and everybody have a great day.